think it's a great idea to incorporate serving others into your routine, even possibly throughout the year. There are a lot of places where people can volunteer year round. You could think about your local hospital, your any nursing homes or assisted living facilities in the area. And if you are an animal lover, I know that animal shelters are likely in need of volunteers too. And some volunteer opportunities are also seasonal, especially around Christmas time, which of course is coming up. You could look into different things that serve others. One that our family participates in is Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree. And there are just lots of opportunities out there. So I encourage you and your family to find something so that you can be serving others in your community.
One way we tried to tackle character development in our home was by making sure to praise positive character qualities when we saw them. So not just disciplining and correcting the negative, but really praising character qualities, things we saw in our children that were kind, that were loving, trying really hard on a daily basis to find something good, to find a character quality that was good and positive and Christ-like, while also correcting and working on the things that were unloving or not truthful, things like that. The second thing would be in a family with 5 children, the opportunities to ask for forgiveness and extend forgiveness are constant and daily. And that was probably one of our biggest areas of character training.
Happy Thanksgiving. One of the ways that we incorporated service into our homeschool was that I let my kids work from a very young age, whether it was helping a friend or a neighbor or volunteering at church. They were encouraged to help set up, tear down, do chores, help with projects that needed to be done. And it gave them a real sense not only of just community, but that they could be givers and doers and not just the receivers of acts of service. And as my kids have grown into adulthood, I'm really enjoying seeing that they still feel like they are people who can contribute and do things and volunteer and look for what needs doing in their communities.
So when it came to Thanksgiving, we would celebrate by opening our doors. We often had international students that we were hosting. We would then also include other international students that were not our host students. We would have grandparents, great-grandparents, people down the street that may not be able to go to extended family or spend time with extended family. We just included them in the fold, and I see that in my kids even now. When it comes to Thanksgiving, they now call it Friendsgiving, but they have big Thanksgivings with everybody that they can find. They like to share, which is something we did, of what they were thankful for, ways to share the gospel, make it as international as possible, talk about the traditions of different areas of the country. But I see it in all my kids that they love Thanksgiving because it's a time that they can open the doors, whether it's here at our house or at their established home where they can make Thanksgiving happen. And it's more than just family and eating. It becomes a time of just sharing and living your faith and living an openness of your house and your love and compassion.
I have done a number of things over the years to instill gratitude in my kids, but I think my favorite thing that we did was to create a gratitude tree. And what I did that year was I found these little urns at a home goods store, and I bought several of them because I created several trees to gift to different family members. If you can't find anything like that, you can certainly use something like a little flower pot or even a small pail to create your tree. And you put floral foam on the inside and then just collect some branches from your yard, or if you don't have any trees in your yard, you could go to a park or ask a friend if you can come collect fallen branches and put them in the floral foam to create this little tree. And then find a time that works for your family. For us, it was dinner time. We ate dinner together most nights. But if that doesn't work for your family because of jobs and workloads and sports or whatever your commitments are, find a different time. It might be breakfast, it might be right before bed. And then I cut out these little cardstock cards and pre-hole punch them so each child would have their own card and they would write something that they could be grateful for that day. Sometimes the thing was big, like they won a soccer match, and sometimes they were small. They finished school before their friends came home from their school, or, they got to watch an extra hour of TV. Whatever the thing was, they would write it on the card and then just take some twine, cut a little snippet, and tie it onto your tree. And you can choose to do it for the whole month of November. You can choose to do it as an Advent practice. So you could start on Thanksgiving and go to Christmas and look for things to be grateful for. It is a wonderful practice to instill in your kids, and you can continue doing it for yourself even when your kids are grown and out of the home.
When it comes to developing character, in our home, we really fight a sense of entitlement by encouraging everyone to contribute to the tasks at hand. So whether that be preparing meals, doing chores, running errands, whatever normal daily activities my husband and I are doing, we get the kids involved at the skill level that they are able to contribute. But what that does is it teaches them that they're part of the household, they're part of the family, and that everybody needs to pitch in and do what they're able to. Because ultimately, when they grow up and move out, I want them to have those basic life skills, but I also want them to be able to walk into any environment and see a need and do what needs to be done to resolve that issue. As a result, it keeps them from being quite as self-centered and entitled as they would be otherwise.
In the middle of all the details of homeschooling that we get into as homeschool families, I do think that it's good to zoom out every now and then and think about what are the big things that we really want to communicate? What are some of the values that we want to share with our families? And how do we develop character? And what characters do we want to develop? And what characteristics do we want to develop? And for me and my husband, one time we sat down and made a list. It was a part of a group event, actually, where we were writing down the values that we wanted for our family, and some of those were more humor, and so that was something we made a focus for that time period, of building in time that we laughed together. Maybe it's serving others. Getting our eyes off ourselves and onto others can just be a huge part of getting into your community and caring about your community and communicating that you want to care about your community with your children. And then also gratitude. Having more gratitude and less complaining around the house can be a big help to a homeschool. So just taking time to be grateful out loud with your family, with your children, that helps a lot as well.
Hi, happy Thanksgiving. November and Thanksgiving and all of the things that come with it are some of my favorite times in the year. I really tried to help my children realize that they were very fortunate and had much to be thankful for. I've already shared over on the app about our 30 Days of Thanks project, and I have loved seeing so many of you participate there. Another thing that we practiced in our home, not just in November, but all the time to try to cultivate a heart of Thanksgiving was this. When my children woke up in the middle of the night, a rule in our house was that you really shouldn't bother mom if Mr. Sunshine isn't out. So I tried very hard to help them stay in their beds unless it was an emergency. So if you just woke up in the middle of the night from a bad dream or scared or just awake, I tried to encourage them to think of 3 things that they were thankful for. And generally, by the time that they did that, their mind was refocused, their heart was settled, and they were able to go back to sleep on their own. So I was just talking to my older daughter and she said, Mom, remember you always told us that, and I still do it and it works. So I hope that all of you have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'm thankful for each one of you.
Hello and welcome to this month's Homeschool Helps Hacks. I am Sunny. I'm Sonlight's community and social media manager, but I'm also a mom of 2 children who have been educated since day one with Sonlight. Joining me today are 2 of our Sonlight mentors, Anne and Amber. Ladies, we're going to start with some introductions. Anne, since you're on top, I'll let you go first. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. My name's Anne. I'm a mentor on the Sonlight app, and I also go to conventions. And so if you end up at a convention, I may get to meet you there too. And I have also homeschooled with Sonlight from the beginning. Back in 2007 is when we started. And I've got 2 children. One has graduated, and one will be graduating in May, June, 2024.
Well, thank you for being here. Amber, you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure. My name's Amber. I, like Anne, have been homeschooling with Sonlight since about the beginning, and that would be 2002. I have 5 children. My oldest is 25. My youngest is 13. So I've got a couple still in school. So I have 2 boys in college, 2 girls who are out, although one is currently doing nursing school. And then my 13-year-old is an 8th grader. And this year we are doing history of science, level J, loving it. Also, like Anne, I am a consultant. And so if you happen to be at some conventions this summer, I'd love to meet you.
Well, thank you, ladies, both for being here. Let's dive right into this month's topic, which is all about cultivating character, helping instill character in your children, and then also remembering to be thankful. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know when people start homeschooling, sometimes it feels very daunting that you've taken on this responsibility to teach all the academic things. But then as you get into it more, you realize you're teaching everything, right? You're not going to be sending those kids off anywhere to learn a lot of those things. So, why is it important, or how do you go about starting with instilling values and helping those children grow up with strong, solid character?
I think the first thing to realize is that you, as the parent, are their example. And they will learn so much just by watching you and how you interact with things and people and things like that.
Yeah, and that's so good. I think there were so many times, especially when I had a lot of young children, right? So 12 and under, all of them, and we're together all the time. And I felt so many times just so overwhelmed by, I just wanted to validate that, Sunny, when you said, all the things, right? So you feel like, oh my goodness, I'm responsible for the academic and the psychological and the emotional and and the nutrition and the physical and all of it. And it does feel quite overwhelming. And so I think as a mom, what Anne said, your character matters a lot and you're modeling for them. So I think for me, taking that time in the morning or at some point during the day to just pause with the Lord to say and acknowledge that, right? Like, I need help. I really need help. And, it's very important. I think, we're homeschooling, school matters, right? It's the second part of homeschool. School matters, but equally character matters. And I have felt that homeschooling gave me that incredible privilege of discipling my children in a way that I could not have if I were away from them for 8 to 10 hours of those critical times that they're awake. So I just have looked at it as, yes, I get to teach academic stuff and we get to go through that. And I've had help along the way with co-ops or whatever, but that character training and discipleship, that's huge.
Yeah, and as overwhelming as it is, who else do you want to be instilling, these character values in your children? As much as it can seem like a burden and just this huge responsibility, that you wouldn't want anybody else to be doing that they do want to get those things from you. And so that's important to keep in mind too. And Amber, what you said about keeping your focus and asking the Lord for help, because we're not doing this alone. No one is alone in doing this. And so that is important to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I loved too, Anne, when you said, who else do you want to have doing this? I remember thinking not only that piece of it, but we all, if you have multiple children, or even if you just have one or two, you might have a child that's so good, so compliant. They went off anywhere. They would never, ever, ever get in trouble. And then you might have the other end of the spectrum where you have a kid who's constantly into everything and maybe misbehaving in a way that wouldn't be acceptable in a classroom. And they'd be in trouble all the time. And that's not really fair either. I don't think either extreme is fair. So I love that in my home, my most compliant child got in trouble, because even compliant children fight with their siblings. Then the one who in a traditional classroom would be in trouble constantly is not in trouble constantly at home, because we can go outside and jump off the energy on the trampoline, or we can, I can redirect immediately, quickly. So I love that aspect too, that yes, I'm the one who gets to do it, and it's fair no matter what kind of child you have.
I love that you brought that up. Yeah, because we talk about, how you could customize your curriculum to your children, but also your parenting. I agree. I mean, so often when you send a child to school, they're at the mercy of how does that teacher teach that classroom, right? I think we can all remember we had stricter teachers. We had teachers that never seemed like they were in control of their classroom. I was always the compliant kid in public for sure. And I hated being in a classroom where other kids were getting out of hand, right? Because it interfered with the way I wanted to learn. And I know I then kind of developed that label of, oh, you're the good kid. So then I felt like I had to live up to that. And I just love that for my kids, I have one who is pretty compliant, but talks a lot. And I know that child would have been in trouble in school, not for being bad necessarily, but just for using their voice, where, I think a lot of kids, they get labeled a certain way, and then that kind of goes with them throughout their academic experience and growing up. And I, even as an adult, my tendency was still like, oh, I've got to be the good kid, right? Even though I was grown, just because that kind of went back to my own school experience. So I love, what you said about being able to parent those kids based on who they are. And then redirecting, if it's a child that would get in trouble for being active, that's totally fine when you're homeschooling, because you can take the breaks. They can go outside, run around, do all of those things. And then they're not getting in trouble for, what I would consider just normal childlike behaviors. So I love that. And Anne, what you said about who else would you want, teaching these children, giving them that, I think that's what I try to remember when it does feel overwhelming. And those days when you feel like you're pulling your hair out, you're like, God, why are they fighting with each other? Why are they driving me crazy? Why is it so loud? Whatever, is bothering you. But then at the heart of it, with the exception of God, who loves your children more than you do. And that's when I go back to, I want what's best for them. And, even the best teacher in the world, or the best whoever in the world, does not love your children like you do. And so I think that really helps in those moments. What are some other ways, though, maybe if you feel like you're coming up against an issue where a child just consistently, either you're butting heads with them or they're fighting with their sibling or something, it's a consistent issue with this child, and you're like, okay, now we need to, work on maybe some things with them. How do you kind of troubleshoot that and figure it out? Because I know so much of parenting, it's kind of learning on the fly, right? So how do you kind of hone in on that and figure out, okay, what should I do, or what should I try? Amber, you mentioned lots of littles all at the same time. How do you do that when you have lots of littles that you're trying to raise at the same time?
Yeah, I don't know if this quite answers your question, but early on, I figured out that, well, I would get angry, right? My patience was, it makes me laugh when people say, oh, you're homeschooling, you must be the most patient person in the world. And I think, oh my goodness, I think that's why I'm homeschooling, because I'm not the most patient person in the world. And God knew that 5 kids would pound it into me, maybe some patience. Anyway, one of the things that I found that really helped me with my own anger toward their disobedience and toward what you're talking about, this training, was to make the discipline and the infractions of the rules very objective. So, if you physically hurt a sibling, there was a consequence. And I had a chart from a company. I can't remember the name of it. If I do remember it, I'll let you know, Sunny, and then we can do it. But they had something called the if-then chart. And it was laminated, and I hung it on the back of a closet door. And it said very clearly what the sin was, like lying, this was the consequence. Hurting a sibling, this was the consequence. Whatever, quarreling, here's the consequence. And so my kids knew what the consequence was. We actually talked about it sometimes, especially with the older kids, like what would be a fair consequence? They came up with some better ones than I would have come up with. So we had the consequence. They knew what the consequence was, and I knew what the consequence was. And that helped keep me in check, right? Because sometimes it feels like, oh my word, I'm putting out all these fires, and then it builds and builds and builds. And maybe Johnny hasn't been in trouble at all that day, but his 3 other siblings have been in trouble. So by the time he's in trouble, then I'm over the top, and the consequence maybe doesn't fit. But if I have it in black and white to make it objective, that helped me a lot. And I think that hopefully that would help others. I think too, when we're talking about discipline, we need to make sure the consequence fits with whatever's happening. And then also to make sure that what they're doing wrong really is a problem, right? Like sometimes it's being a child and it's a mistake, or it's just some foolishness, and they don't need a big consequence. They just need to be taught, right? So I think having wisdom to see the difference there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said about communication resonated. You communicated with them. You showed them, this chart and talked about it and all that kind of thing. And that is so important. And I think when and like you said, sometimes things are just because they're a child, and you kind of have to try to put yourself in their place and see how they're seeing it, so that you can explain it potentially from their point of view. And sometimes that happened when my kids were a little older and on sports teams. They would act a certain way to me, as their parent, that I know they would never act in a way to their coach, or some other authority figure. And so we would talk about it from that point of view. Explain that relationship that they have with their coach, and that they know that relationship and they know what it's like, and then compare it to, as me as their teacher, even though, their mom and this is their home, they still have to meet certain expectations. And so I think it is really good to try to meet them, where they're at and where they're coming from. And I would try also to, of course, you always realize that, all of us are sinners. None of us are perfect. All of us are sinners. And the only way that we can, get any better at anything character-wise is by reading your Bible. And so we would be, looking at verses, what's at the heart of this matter? Is it because you're not showing love to your sibling? Or are you jealous? You can find so many things about what the heart of the matter is, and then look into scripture and try to find a verse to potentially, set to memory. I remember looking a lot, especially the one about doing things without grumbling. And that's one that we looked at quite often.
And I love that you're saying that, because one of the things we incorporated into our home was copying scripture in the moment of something like this. So for instance, if one of my children said something nasty to another child or spoke in a disrespectful way, Ephesians 4:29 is a favorite. Let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only what is good for building others up according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear. So you want to say something sarcastic or cutting or vulgar or unlovely? That's nice. Here's a notebook and here's a Bible, and please sit down and copy Ephesians 4:29. I don't need to get angry. And I have to preach this to myself. I don't need to get angry. I just need to respond. Here is the consequence for speaking that way. Go ahead and pull out your Bible and please copy this verse.
Some people think that's really awful. I think it's wonderful because I'm not the one who made up that you need to be careful of what comes out of your mouth. God made it up. So in the fact of, so maybe my son is angry and blurts out something in anger. He sits down to write. It's automatically focusing him on something productive. He has to stop. He has to think to copy. I have to be able to read it, or we're going to keep copying it till I can read it and everything's spelled right because you're copying, you know? And then he finishes copying and I say, what did I have you read? The verse that I had you write. Reads it. Why do you think I had you copy that verse? Because I was a smart aleck with you. I wasn't respectful. Okay, great. So then how do we make this right? And depending on the age, I make them ask for forgiveness and I make them do it the right way. And we have a hug and all of that. But my point is, even my little people, even at 3 and 4 years old, if they could hold a pencil, I would do children obey your parents. And I would make dots for the verse and they would trace it. And I would say, what does this say? And they knew what they were copying. Children obey your parents. Okay. And who says that? It's God. It's not mommy making that up. You need to obey. So from early on, but the consistency of doing that, I had a child, it didn't matter how much I spanked. There was never repentance. If I had that child write a verse, almost 100% of the time, she would come back to me with a changed demeanor. It was incredible to me how the Holy Spirit used his word to change her heart in a way that all of my yelling and spanking could never do. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because you bring up so much of the time as parents, if we get angry and we're like, oh, we're gonna take away this, or it's like some random arbitrary thing that doesn't fit the crime of what they did, right? We're obviously getting angry, we're reacting and lashing out in the moment. We're not thinking rationally at that point either because we're frustrated. And I love how this is a very practical approach, right? It's very streamlined, but then also, like you said, it turns them back to what God says about that thing. And when you were talking about how they would talk to a coach, right? Like I think so often it's easier because the kids are comfortable with their parents, right? That this is where they let their hair down. It's home. And so they just want to, oh, I'm irritated or I'm frustrated or my brother's driving me crazy or whatever it might be, and they're getting angry. But yet if you really help them reshift that focus and, you know, what does God want me to do? How am I treating this person? I love what you said there, Amber, about they realize even from an early age, and the repentance happens without you losing control, screaming, any of those other things. So yeah, that I think is super helpful. Also, I mean, I have a tendency, I'm very much an introvert, so noise after a while grates on me. And so I'll find myself getting frustrated even when nobody's doing anything, right? They're just existing in my space. And so if you are like that, I highly recommend go somewhere, you know, take a quick walk around the house or go to another room, just get away from everything, pray. If you have time to read a couple of those verses, you know, copy the verses yourself. I also like to copy scripture because when you write, just that brain hand connection, I feel like it gets in there more, but you may have to do that. And that is something that I have learned about myself, is that I need a certain amount of absolute silence or I cannot be a good mother.
And Sunny, I would love to piggyback off that. I'm okay with noise. Some, right? I mean, once you have 5 children, if you're not okay with noise, you've got to do something or you are going to go crazy. But so I've learned to tolerate the noise. What I found was triggering me, but I didn't realize it till I got a little older, was chaos, like physical mess in my space. When things got too messy in my home. Now, for some moms, that's not an issue, right? They don't even see it. I don't think my husband would see it, but I see it. And it's and it's in the back of my head. And someone had to point it out to me before I realized, you know what? when I'm most irritated, it's when my environment feels out of control. So just knowing that has really helped me, because we can't keep our environment under control all the time. But for me to say, okay, acknowledge it. Yes, it's a mess, but it's not going to stay this way. In 2 hours, we'll have a pickup time. I'm okay. I'm okay. I gotta be okay. So I think that's good when you said noise, that's a trigger. You might have to push through, but even just acknowledging, okay, I'm feeling really irritated, but it's because of this. And so then, when you said make yourself write a verse, I also found that rewarding myself with chocolate is helpful. Amber, good job. You didn't get upset. Have a few M&Ms. I don't know. I'm just saying.
We use when our kids work with us, right? That same reward cycle and motivation.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about developing empathy for others. I know we talked briefly there about repentance, but I think this is something that is so important when kids are young. I mean, I think we see it in adults arguing, that just don't relate to other people, or they are not empathetic of another viewpoint that might be different than their own. What is a good way, or what's helpful? I mean, I think in using Sonlight, we've really developed a lot of empathy for other cultures and people that we may not have known about before. But what are some ways to do that and really foster that side of character development with your kids while they're still living with you?
You want to tackle that first, Anne, or you want me to
Sure.
go?
Yeah, yes. And talking about the Sonlight book aspect of it, it really does. The literature-based curriculum really does lend itself to developing empathy for other people, even though the people may not even be real. They're fictional characters. That doesn't matter. You're still seeing the situations that they're in and being able to develop empathy for them. And one of the things that I like to, I printed it off here because I thought it might come up at some point in time about the Sonlight books, that one of the things about any Sonlight book, it has to meet certain criteria. And one of them is to have real or realistic characters. So all the characters in the books, so think about the heroes. The heroes are not perfect. They're going to be flawless. They're not, excuse me, I said that backwards. They're not going to be flawless people. And then the antagonists are not going to be just thoroughly, totally detestable, because the world is not black and white. And the kids will see that while you're reading the books, and you'll be able to talk about these characters and why they do this and that, and how this is good, but this is bad. And so the characters in the books are nuanced and complex, just the way real people are. And so reading through all of these amazing books, all through starting at a very young age, really helps them to develop that. And the other thing that applies to this with that book test for a Sonlight book to be a Sonlight book is that the protagonist does have to have character development. There's no such thing as a flat, character going through that book as far as the protagonist goes. So you will see change for the better in that character. And all these things are things that you talk about as you go through, and then you can apply them. When you have dealings with other people, especially, the siblings, trying to see how they're seeing things. And one more point I wanted to mention, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, but how reconciliation, is the conclusion that we're looking for when when any of these I can't think of the word disagreements, all these things come up. Reconciliation is the answer, and to be able to reconcile with somebody, it definitely helps to be able to be empathetic towards them.
I think we could go back to the very beginning of our conversation where Anne talked about modeling. Right. And so I think one of the biggest things about empathy and listening is if, as a parent, you actually are a good listener. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of adults, is to actually be a good listener. And so do you take time to get down on your 5-year-old's level and really listen? Right? Mommy, 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 what? Right? Instead of, this is why I'm here. I'm at home And I'm going to try to limit distractions, especially during school time, so that I am available to listen, right, when they need to be listened to. And so sometimes, I mean, I don't think sometimes, I think daily, each child should know they have your undivided attention, at least for a few minutes. And sometimes that gets very difficult, right? You've got a baby and maybe a toddler and a couple school-aged, and you feel like you're going nuts. But even for the older ones to say, I want to hear you. I can't right now because Phoebe's crying and Charles is drawing on the wall. But this afternoon, when I put them down for their nap, I'm going to find you and we're going to talk about anything you want to talk about. So giving them that acknowledgement that you're going to actually listen to them and taking the time to get on their level and say, what did you want to say to me? Right? Like, stop what you're doing and actually listen. And I think that modeling is really helpful. The other thing too, you might have a boy. I'm going to pick on boys here because this is the one, they're the ones that typically we sense maybe aren't as empathetic. You might have a little boy who's so rough and tumble, and you have this great fear that he's going to grow up to not be empathetic. Please don't assume that, when they're so young. They don't have a grid to be empathetic necessarily. Again, like the compliant child, there are children who seem to be born empaths, right? They just seem to be born empathetic. That doesn't mean that the child who doesn't seem to be that way won't get there, right? And as they watch you modeling it, and you really listen, you look them in the eye, you teach them to look people in the eye and answer questions and listen to other people. Yeah, all of those things are training and they're important.
Yeah, and I love that when you talked about modeling, because I've always talked about how my kids know how to introduce themselves, or they know how to say please and thank you. And those were things that I didn't sit down one day and I was like, okay, today we're going to learn how to do this, but they were always with me when I was around other people. So they got to witness me doing it. And then when they got a little older, if somebody would say, oh, what's your name? If they just stood there, I'd be like, well, they asked you a question, what they say, so you kind of prompt them until they get to an age, or if they're very shy, to a comfort level where they're able to do those things. But that's just a small example of the things that they'll learn just by watching how you interact with people. And I love what you said about listening. When I think of good listeners, I think of my dad, because he was always, it did not matter what it was. If it was something super, super girly, I always say he was the best father to daughters, because he would get into those activities with us. Or if we wanted to talk about, super girly things, he would be like, oh, okay, well, tell me about it. He knew that it was important to us. And so he made it a point to make it important to him. And
such a gift, Sunny. It's such a gift. Yeah.
And I mean, and I think even now, who's the first person, if I have exciting news or I need to kind of talk through something, I'm like, oh, I need to call Daddy and talk to him, because he'll know what the best advice is for this. But that was something, that just, I often say, I think I ended up homeschooling because he was very much the one that would encourage me to explore or learn new things, and would listen like that. But it very much, that example that I saw in childhood is something that I've tried to continue with my own kids. And I really like to get them one-on-one. That is my very favorite time, whether we be teaching or we're going to go out to eat or whatever it is, because that is when your kids will open up to you the most, because they don't have to fight for attention. There's not somebody else, in there. And so it's funny, because my daughter, being 5 years older, oftentimes she'll want to come back and kind of listen to the school conversations with her brother, because, oh, I loved that book, and she wants to jump in and get all excited. And sometimes I have to tell her, hold on, I want to hear what he thinks of it, because otherwise she'll talk over him and he won't get the chance. But yeah, just those conversations that you have when you're reading these Sonlight books with your kids, that if you can separate them a little bit. I know it's hard when they're little, but I mean, I always taught my older child with her brother strapped to my chest in the baby carrier when he was really tiny, or in the little toddler seat nearby when she was little. So I mean, there are ways like that you can make it possible to, you know, give that child the attention they need, but still have everybody around. But yeah, I love that listening to your child and then modeling that behavior for them. Same thing when it comes to gratitude. I know at Thanksgiving, everybody always thinks, you know, okay, now's the time to express what we're thankful for, but really we should be doing that year round. So what are some ways to encourage that, or teach your children to be thankful and appreciative of, you know, whatever blessings are in their life?
You know, Sunny, I kind of, I mean, we're using modeling is coming up a lot, but you are right. Like, do you ever say thank you to your children? I'm sorry. If you ask them to do the dishes and they do it, why can't you say thank you? Right? You ask them to pick up their room. Why can't you say thank you? I have been in homes where I never hear the word thank you or please. Like, set the table, do the dishes, and things get done. And I mean, I think it becomes a way of life. And so maybe people get hardened to it and don't notice. But I'm sorry, if I ask my child to make me a cup of coffee or bring me a drink of water, why would I not say please? And why would I not say thank you? So just like we want our children to talk to us in the same way they would address their coaches or a teacher, with respect, how about we model again for them the common courtesy that we would give to the checkout clerk, or, you know, the guy who changes our tires, or, you know, does a tire rotation for us, whatever. Thank you. So modeling thankfulness on the daily, not waiting for the fourth Thursday of November. One thing. I'll let Ann chime in.
Right. Yeah. Don't wait till Christmas and say thank you for the Christmas present. Oh yeah, absolutely. They need to be seeing that daily from you. Absolutely. And homeschooling, you know, when your kids are with you, you know, all the time when they're younger and can't stay home by themselves, you're taking them to the grocery store, you're taking them to the post office, to all these places. And they absolutely, whether you realize it or not, they are seeing, you know, how you act towards other people, and that politeness. I think, yeah, you don't have to check out a book from the library, you know, that talks about how to do these things. You know, modeling again and again. I think with all of the, you know, character things we want to instill, giving things, all these things that this whole, recording is about, is absolutely, every single one of them, needs to be modeled by you as the parent, which again seems like a big burden, and it can, but but that's why we were put here this time with them at this time, is to do that. It's our job.
And I think again, with the literature-based curriculum, where we're reading stories confronted with people who do not have what we have, right? Even to take the time to point that out, because it is so easy, even for me, you know, air conditioning. Of course we have air conditioning. I deserve to have air conditioning. You know, of course my house is warm. Of course I have clothes. Of course I have food to eat. I'm me. I deserve it. Right? I mean, really, we just walk around our day. I'm healthy. Of course I'm healthy. You know, I eat right. I do what I'm supposed to do. Of course, it's me. I deserve to be healthy. Well, sorry, no. All of these things are gifts. And even as you're studying science and the human body and things, and just go, wow, this is incredible. Isn't it fun that we have? And of course, our kids, especially at a certain age, when they're really little, they'll get excited about things they're thankful for. And you know, you hit those middle school years, like, oh, brother, mom, yeah, right, but still, that working through it, right? And again, we can't expect them to constantly handle that the right way, but lots of opportunities, not only to learn empathy with characters, but to learn, wow, we're living at a time in history that, man, I mean, even medicine, all of it, we have so many things to be thankful for. And it is the path to bitterness and anger when we forget to be thankful, right? We're on a really bad trajectory. And so they need to see too how much we need to keep our focus on what we have to be thankful for, because it doesn't change for us, right? As adults, you stop being thankful. You're in a world of hurt. We all are. So
yeah, I think that's a great point. When you shift your focus off of yourself, like when you were talking about I deserve this because I did this or that or whatever.
Yeah.
I remember as a child, now going back to my mom, she used to say, we deserve nothing. It's only by God's grace that we have anything. And so whenever I hear somebody say I deserve that, I always go back to, well, actually, we don't deserve anything. So, I'm grateful for, the fact that there's air in my lungs, or Amber, you mentioned being able-bodied, the fact that I can even move through society. And I live in a time in a place where I can move through society without fear for the most part, which, has not always been the case for people, whether it be now or back historically speaking. And so, I think that's something so important to remember, is everything we have is a blessing. And when we express that and our kids hear that, because I think as a child, you only know what you know, right? If you have always lived a certain way, or you've always lived in a certain area, you think, oh, everybody's got this. And I know you mentioned the middle schoolers. I think about that age where kids are like, well, so-and-so has an iPad and so-and-so has this. And, and they really start to compare, right? And they see what other people have. And it's always stuff that they have, right? They're not focused on, they have a family who loves them, and, the things we wish they would. And so, when you can shift that focus off of yourself or shift it towards other people, I think you really, you gain a better understanding of the blessings you have. And also, the things you can be grateful for.
Yes, it just made me think about the missionary stories that are included in all the different levels of Sonlight, and how, they're all in different places. And so your kids absolutely get a good understanding of, what it's like to live in these different places, and how God provides for these missionaries as they're doing his work. And that's also a great example. And I'm thankful for the books that Sonlight has chosen that I've gotten to read, because I might not have found them otherwise. And they've definitely been a blessing through the years.
Yeah. And I think too, Sunny, you talked about being able-bodied, and I brought up being healthy. But I think it's such an amazing thing too, right? We have so many examples of people who have physical limitations, or who have suffered incredibly in very difficult circumstances, but still have a heart of gratitude. And that is possible if you fundamentally trust God and know that this life is not all there is, that there's so much more. And so as our kids grow, and you're right, they hit a time, and I think all children, they have to leave home and get out on their own a little bit before they understand that big picture of all of it. But getting to the point where there is a world beyond this world that matters infinitely more. And my soul can be right with God. And so I can be thankful for whatever comes my way.
Absolutely. Yeah, so true. And along with that, you mentioned that perspective, right? That until a child is really grown and they don't have kind of that, well, their brain's not fully formed, of course, but then that perspective shift of realizing that. Let's talk a little bit about making wise choices and understanding consequences and decision making. I know I have a teenager now. That's often a scary time for parents, in the sense that you're about to release them into the world. You want to make sure you've done everything you can to help them know how to make those wise choices and use good critical thinking and things like that. What are your suggestions or ideas in that area for helping give your children that foundation?
Yeah, I think the ability to make the wise choices and thing, a lot of it can stem from actual chores. They have a responsibility in the home, and that's important for sure for them to be responsible for something. And the chore that I've seen in our home that develops the most responsibility for them is laundry, because I forget how old they were when they each started to do their own laundry, but I just took that completely off my plate. So if they need a certain uniform for their team or whatever they have to wear a certain day, it is their job to get that ready in time. So I know. So how does laundry develop critical thinking? I mean, it's kind of crazy, but it really does, because they have to plan ahead, and it starts with little things like that. And then the other side of that is that you do have to allow them to fail. You can't be at their rescue at every moment. And if they didn't realize they needed, back to the laundry thing, they didn't have this ready a certain time, they've got to deal with that consequence. And I promise that dealing with a consequence a couple of times will instill that responsibility more than if you bailed them out.
Yeah, I love when you asked that question. I just jotted down two things so I wouldn't forget. And the first thing I jotted down was they are going to mess up.
Yeah.
they are going to mess up. They are going to make mistakes. Stop worrying about that being a reflection of you or your parenting, which is a hard trap for a lot of us, I think, me included. This is about them and what's best for them. So they are going to mess up, just like you messed up and I messed up. We need to allow them to mess up and show them grace when they do and have consequences. I think the other thing, Sunny, is you are right. They're hitting high school. These teenagers, we want them to be prepared, but they're not there yet. So that's another thing, right? They're not full grown. Teenagers look full grown, and they're tall, and they seem strong, and some of them seem very confident and put together. They aren't. Inside, they're not. And they need parents, whether they act like it or not. They need adults in the room who aren't going to freak out, who are going to answer their questions, who are going to help them think through the hard questions. And in this culture, there are lots of hard questions to ask. So without freaking out, without cramming something down into them, right? Does that make sense? But allowing them to dialogue with us and not solving it all today. Like, this can be an ongoing conversation. They need to know that you're actually going to listen and dialogue and all of that, but they don't get to call the shots, right? So it's okay to have rules for your teenagers. It's okay if you decide you're not going to have a phone till this age. We aren't watching that movie in this house. No, you do not have permission to hang out with that person. You can have rules. It's be the parent. They're not full grown. They need you. And you can, I think it's absolutely essential that you talk through why you have the standards you have, all of that, because they are starting to think. And when they leave the house, you want them to have standards and know why, right? And they might not be the same as yours, but hopefully they'll be individuals who move out and say, I'm accountable to God now, and here's what I think is right and wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Sorry, that was a lot of things, but
no, that was so good though, because I think, yeah, you do kind of walk that fine line. And you said something about, even if they don't act like they want you there, they don't say they need you there, right? Because I think when I think about any of the conflict that I had as a teenager with my parents, or that I've had with my teenager, it's usually somebody is acting like, I don't need you, I don't want you, right? And as a parent, you kind of, your feelings are probably hurt because you're like, this is my baby, yes. Why do they not love me anymore, right? It feels very I don't know, personal. Like they're attacking you.
Personal.
Yes. Personal. Yes. Especially, I think you mentioned too, when you're homeschooling that child, right? You've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into them that it can feel very hard if they are throwing anything back in your face, right? Because you're like, oh, I did it all right? Or you assume you did it all right. I love how you said that it's not a reflection of your parenting, right? Some of this is the growing pains of them growing and learning and figuring out who they are. And I know I've had the conversations with my daughter after the fact, because both of us have a tendency to get emotional when we get upset, and one or both of us can both be in that situation where once we come back together and reconcile, and you mentioned that earlier, that the goal is reconciliation, that we both realize, oh, I let my emotions get the best of me, and I, either reacted in a way I didn't want to, or maybe I said things I didn't mean to, but I'm apologizing to you now, forgive me, and again, modeling that behavior for them. You guys mentioned that we have a tendency, we treat our kids like adults when they don't know any better, right? When they're little, but yet when they are acting like, but then when they're acting like kids, then we expect them to be an adult. Like, I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly, but yeah, and we want them to react like another adult would, but they're not going to, because they are still growing and developing. And and there are many times I have to remind myself, okay, I just need to be here and listen to this child, let them say what they need to say. Because like you said, I want them to know that they can come to me later, right? If something big is happening, I don't want them to feel like, oh, she's not going to listen to me, or, oh, she's going to be shocked, she's never heard this before, or whatever it is. Because I want them, when they're kind of figuring out, well, what do I believe about this? Who am I, right? How do I feel about whatever is going on? And you mentioned it, with what's going on in modern society today, there are so many messages bombarding kids now that, with the internet and everything else, they're seeing all these different things. I want them to be able to kind of wrestle through those things with me. And so, I think that's huge to remember that.
Sunny, one of the things that I picked up, I guess my oldest was a senior. We were having some challenges. That's a whole nother story. But I read an article, it wasn't even Christian, but the principle is so biblical. When your child, especially teenage years, when they get loud and combative, it's time for you to get quiet and close. And if quiet and close, if you can just remember those two words. And I shared that with a friend once who had a daughter who was expressing a lot of anger. She'd slam the door and scream at her mom, whatever. And so we talked about that. And she said, oh, my tendency is to shout back, right? To get into a combative posture. And she said, I tried it. Instead of shouting back, I went and sat right next to her and just was quiet. And the daughter didn't calm down immediately, but the mom didn't shout back. And what ended up happening was the daughter started sobbing, and there was a hug, and there was an actual conversation. So I think quiet and close, and I think that would work in a lot of situations, but especially when you hit those teenage years, to be quiet and close. And then one other thing I wanted to jump in on, our kids aren't finished. They're not finished, right? And so many times when both of my boys are in college. So I got one who's a senior and one who's a freshman. They look, again, adultish, and they say some really profound and wonderful things. And then other times you're like, what? Okay. And so I can't tell you how many times my husband we've gotten off the phone or out of the conversation, and he looks at me and says, he's not done. He's not finished.
So good.
He's still growing. He's still learning. It's okay. Because I want to just flip. So it's good to have a voice reminding you, even when they hit college, right? They're not finished. They're not done.
Right.
And it's okay.
That's not our job, is to create these little perfect people
yes. And
by the time they're 18, they're just going to be little perfect people to go do whatever they're supposed to do. No, that's not our job at all. And so the close and the quiet, those are amazing. And then communicate is something that happens because of those. Your example that you said with your friend, they were able to communicate because of that. And back to being a model again, an example, talking about responsibilities and consequences. We get into situations where we have bad consequences for some, choices we made or whatever. And I think it's really important to share those things with our kids and be open and honest, and I said, look, what I did, I said I was going to do this and this, I was not able to, here's, this consequence that happened. So it's so important that they realize that we are not perfect people either. And that, we are we grow daily in our walk with the Lord, and that's all that we can that's all we can ask for.
I think that's so good, Anne. And I was even thinking, as you said that, about conflict with my husband. So we try really hard not to fight and bicker in front of our children. And that doesn't mean we close our bedroom door and then bicker. We try hard not to bicker and fight. Okay. I think it's important, right? I mean, God's word is pretty clear that we're supposed to love other people. So we need to figure that out. But there will be times, obviously. So if I am mouthy with my husband in front of my kids, guess what I do? I apologize to my husband in front of my kids. So from the time they're tiny, and even with one of their siblings, this has happened many times where I will lose it with one of the kids, and maybe I'm harsh in a way I shouldn't have been. That doesn't mean they didn't deserve a consequence, but maybe I was overly harsh or overly whatever. And in front of my other children will say, the way I spoke to Josiah was not okay. He disobeyed, and there's a consequence for disobeying. See, it's right on our chart over there on the back of the wall. But the way I handled it was unloving. Josiah, will you please forgive me for being unloving? Yes, mommy. And then look at the other kids. Will you please forgive me for being unloving toward Josiah? Yes. Okay. If that becomes part of the fabric of your home, that is something God is gonna bless. And those are kids who are gonna grow up, and they're gonna ask for forgiveness, and they're gonna truly listen, and they're gonna know about handling conflict. It really, really matters.
Yeah, that's so good. I hate to wrap this up because I feel like we could keep talking all day, but we are running so low on time. So for anybody that's watching, if we didn't get to a question in the comments or something like that, please drop it in the comments later and we will come back and answer those. And hopefully we did get to your question though. And ladies, thank you so much for being here. You brought so much wisdom. I just wanted to wrap it up by saying, just like our kids aren't finished, we're not finished yet either. So it's always learning and growing, and we are here if you need help and advice, but we also love to pray for you and help you work through whatever is going on in your homeschooling. So if you're struggling right now, let us know, reach out to us. We don't want you to go through it alone, and we will be here for you. Anne and Amber, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.